So, I'm a van dweller. If that's not self-explainable enough, it's basically when somebody willingly lives in a van, rather than a house or apartment. It's not too bad. My van is equipped with basically everything a regular house would have. It's just in a more compact space, and ultimately, it is cheaper in the long run. If I need a shower, I can stop by the gym. If I need to use the bathroom, I will either use the closest gas station or the great outdoors. In recent years, it has become pretty trendy to van dwell, and that is no surprise given the ridiculously housing and rent prices these days. Listen, I'm not here to sound like a hipster, but I have been at this gig for nearly 2 decades now, so I'd argue I've got a lot more experience than most people do on the road, good and bad. I've had people try to steal my van, or steal things from inside my van. Sometimes, they've tried to steal my van while I'm still inside of it. I've had weirdos follow me for miles, meth heads breaking in my windows, cops pulling me over for thinking I'm hauling immigrants, and so forth. If you and I met at a bar, I could keep you occupied all night with all kinds of crazy tales from my life on the road. At the same time, I have met many wonderful people throughout all sorts of cultures in both American continents, and have seen countless beautiful sights, whether they are cities with skyscraper towers or open ranges where the population is sparse. I have gotten to try so many kinds of foods and hear all kinds of music, and listen to unique stories and perspectives on life. Van life isn't perfect, and it's definitely hard work, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'll die knowing I've lived my life to the fullest, and that's all I could really ask for. Still, none of my experiences, good or bad, compare to the surrealness of when I was lurking in the mountains of Montana about 10 years ago. I had been traveling around the northwestern U.S. for a couple of months, and was preparing to drive back down south as fall was getting ready to make its return. It was a night in around early September, I'd say, and I found myself inside an aloof campsite somewhere in the western part of the state. Whenever I could, I slept in a brightly lit, busy area. Sounds like hell, but curtains over the windows along with earplugs make it so it's really not that bad. I did this for safety reasons, obviously. Less chance of somebody trying to steal my stuff. Being in the western half of the U.S., though, I had to get used to the idea that I wouldn't always find a place like that, given how spread out its geography is. A lot of nights in my van and I were completely alone in wide, empty areas. I had trouble sleeping through the first few nights because of it, but I grew accustomed to it, eventually. I even left the curtains open so I could see the stars through my window. The lack of light pollution was quite a nice change of pace, and I began to dread having to sleep in cities again. On this particular night, I had begun a fire and cracked open a beer, playing on a banjo that I had gotten just a few months prior. The cell service and internet was shoddy where I was at best, and at the time, I hadn't yet gone out of my way to get a mobile plan, which involved usage of satellites, so I wasn't left with much to entertain myself with except my banjo and a few books. I stopped playing as soon as my eye caught sight of an animal lurking somewhere in the distance. The fire provided enough light to make out a figure of what appeared to be an elk, but there was something extremely strange about its appearance. It seemed to be discolored. Its legs were abnormally long, and it looked like it had too many joints. When I squinted my eyes to get a better look at it, my heart began racing as I noticed its face was only a skull. The rest of its body was covered in fur, but past its neck, it was just bone. No skin, eyes, no anything. I was trying to make sense of it in my head, but no matter how I tried to come to a conclusion, I always thought of another way that it couldn't be explained. And that's when I noticed it didn't have any hooves, but what seemed to be human hands on both the end of its front and back legs. Even though it didn't visibly have any eyes, it seemed to stare at me. It didn't move, however. Not wanting to move myself, I simply froze. I couldn't do much but try and calm myself down by focusing on the chirps of the bugs that surrounded me and the thing. And after what felt like forever, which was probably actually only a minute, I began to slowly play my banjo again. I don't know why I did this, if I'm being honest. It didn't react. I continued this for a bit until I ultimately decided to get up from the log I'd been sitting on and walk backwards into my van, silently closing the doors and shut the curtains, all the while making sure to keep the interior dark. I was tempted to climb into the driver's seat and take off, but at the same time, I didn't want to cause any disturbances. I wasn't sure whether or not it was a hostile creature. It was just standing there and staring. I didn't want to alarm it and cause it to lash out and damage my van, especially in the middle of nowhere. I crawled in bed instead and tried to sleep. After a few minutes, I heard what sounded like the snort of a horse, and I heard something shifting around my van. The fire outside was still lit, and through the curtains, I could make out the silhouette of the elk mere feet away from me. It continued to pace around, and it seemed to do this for hours. Somehow, I fell asleep, and by the time morning came, I pulled back the curtains to check to see if it was still there. I couldn't find anything. The fire had put itself out and was still smoking, and I decided it was still safe to head out and take a leak. As soon as I opened my car door, I noticed a pile of sticks right in front of it. I was confused, but I figured I must have not noticed them sitting there in the evening before. I had to go to the bathroom pretty bad, so I ignored it and did my business. Then went about my day. I was on my way down south, and when I stopped again that night, I noticed I was still in Montana, but pretty far from the campsite I'd stayed the night before. I slept in the parking lot and woke up the next morning to what I swore was the same pile of sticks just outside my van, except this time, it was slightly less in quantity. Again, I ignored it and continued on my travels. When I took a nap in northern Wyoming, I still woke up to the sticks, and yet again, in an even smaller pile. I was freaked out as anybody would be. Part of me was tempted to take the sticks and lock them in my car, so whoever or whatever was messing with me would have to go out of their way to bother me. Still, at the same time, I did not think it was a good idea to touch the things, and at that rate, they'd disappear soon enough anyway. It wasn't until I'd gotten towards the middle half of Wyoming did the sticks finally stop showing up. For the rest of that year, I had no problems. I told my family and friends of the strange incident, but they treated my sighting as nothing more than an urban legend, and the stick incident as a mere coincidence. If I'm being honest, so did I. I figured I was just seeing things, that maybe it was something about the high altitudes that threw my brain and vision off. The following summer, I traveled back up to the northwest and stopped about 50 miles from the campsite where I first saw the elk. My heart sank when I woke up the following morning to another pile of sticks right outside my van. I swore it was even smaller than the last time. My paranoia then got the best of me, so I decided to say screw my plans and leave then and there, going off to sleep when I only had to. When I did rest that night, I found 2 sticks crossed over each other, like an X, the following morning. When I drove even further, I woke up to none at all. When I saw more of my friends about a month later, one of them said her aunt was a psychic and could probably tell me what was going on. I didn't really believe in paranormal stuff, but with what I had experienced, I was open to any sort of input. She got me on the phone with her aunt, and her aunt said that while she wasn't absolutely certain, she believed I did something to disturb a skinwalker on what it considered its sacred grounds, and used these sticks as a warning to get me to get out and stay far away, and that the longer I lingered, the less chances I had. What it ended up doing to me, though, was only left to the imagination. She said I was good to get out of there when I did, because who knows what would have ended up happening the next night. It wasn't long before the idea that my banjo music appalled the Skinwalkers so much that it threatened to kill me made its way around my friend group as an inside joke. I laughed along with them, but deep down, I was and still am terrified. I have not returned to the area since, and will never go back, because I know it will remember me. Hell, at this point, I basically refuse to touch any state that borders Montana. I am a bit disappointed, given how beautiful the Mountain West is. If this never happened, I would probably spend most of my summers up there. I do sometimes wonder if I could cheat in the sense of visiting Alberta or Saskatchewan instead. But something tells me skinwalkers don't abide by modern concepts of borders. To me, it's just not worth the risk, or putting my family through the trouble of needing my body transported from Canada to the U.S., or having to deal with me being missing entirely from a different country. Whatever the case, I'm glad I've stayed far away to not bother it anymore. I don't even want to think about what might have happened to any other potential people out there that didn't listen to the warnings it's given them. Maybe I'm a little too paranoid, or carried away because of my experience, but I can't help but wonder if that's why so many people go missing in the mountains, only to never turn up again.